every military officer must pass a mental fitness evaluation before they assume their duties, and those handling nuclear weapons have to undergo rigorous psychological testing every year. But the commander-in-chief of all of them has no such requirement. And that glaring omission is something that the public needs to be aware of, that fitness for duty exams are actually quite common, and every single job where life and death is concerned, but not the one on whom the nation's survival depends.
A critical component to mind control. Being made over to be clones of the person who's at the top of the pyramid.
Interested in the subject because of my own cult involvement. I was recruited in 1974 into a front group of the Moonies.
Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Hassan with another episode of my podcast, Cult Conversations, The Influence Continuum with Dr. Steve Hassan. And I have a very special guest this week, Dr. Bandy X Lee, forensic psychiatrist extraordinaire, a woman who I have interviewed previously and known over the years of the Trump debacle experience. I'm just going to read a little bit, Bandy, and then hold up a couple of the books and such. You are a internationally recognized expert on violence who taught at the Yale School of Medicine and Yale Law School from 2003 to 2020. In addition to an authoritative textbook, you published over 100 peer-reviewed articles and chapters, 17 edited scholarly books and journal special issues, more than 300 op-eds in outlets such as The Guardian, New York Times, Globe, Independent, Politico. You've assembled professionals for the New York Times bestseller, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, 37 psychiatrists and mental health experts assess a president. And I have your first edition, which was 27. This is the second edition, 37. And I had the honor of coming to the National Press Club where you had a launch for the book, and I was privileged to speak. And I'll add that you have a further edition with 50 people, The Much More Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. And I was honored to contribute something on the cult of Trump for that. And you are the president of the World Mental Health Coalition, which I am a member of from its inception. And all I can say is that, experts have been dissed and have been absent from media to educate our citizenry. And there was a whole censorship program. And, my understanding is the APA was misquoting an ancient rule called the Goldwater Rule as an excuse to ban your appearances, even though your book was a New York Times bestseller when it first came out. And we really have a lot of very brilliant, talented experts saying this guy is dangerous. And I'm going to say it. We told you so. Well, you told them so, and I told them so. And with that, we are recording now August 18th. And we just had a debacle in Alaska where Putin met with Trump and basically fawned and just was like kissing Putin. And it was a great propaganda coup for Russia and Putin. And we got nothing out of it. And Ukraine is being left behind. So, and then the current mess, the Epstein files are not going away. So we're seeing some significant disillusionment. So I've set the table. Welcome, Dr. Bandy Lee, to the Influence Continuum.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for having me and all your contributions over the years. And we have really kind of held a partnership together trying to educate the public. And it is, of course, from a mental health perspective, a real tragedy because all this was predictable and predicted, as well as preventable.
Yeah, so I'm going to assume people who are listening or watching this have not seen our previous interviews and maybe haven't heard of you before. Talk to us about your expertise at assessing dangerousness and whether or not you have to sit with somebody in your office to clinically, diagnose them in order to assess them, and this whole Goldwater Rule crap. Just set the table for people, please.
Sure. Well, it all began after Donald Trump's first election in 2016.
Right.
When a dear colleague of mine for many decades at that point, Judith Herman, and a couple other of her renowned colleagues wrote a letter to Barack Obama stating that the new president-elect needed a neuropsychiatric evaluation. And so mental health experts had a very special point of view in that we spotted what many just assumed was a different style, or they didn't know what to make of what he was bringing to the table, because most people are not exposed to such extreme degrees of mental impairment, especially in the realm of personality disorders. And of course, that's my area of specialty.
Right.
And so I agreed immediately with Judy, and we got back in touch after, because it had been a number of years since I had left Harvard. And we decided to do a conference together. So in early 2017, a couple months after inauguration, we held a conference, an ethics conference, as to whether or not we had a duty to warn as mental health experts.
Wasn't that at Yale, Bandy, if I remember?
Yes, it was. Initially, I had brought together the Yale School of Medicine, the Yale School of Public Health, and Yale Nursing School,
right?
Because we thought that there would be extreme emergencies, health emergencies with this presidency. But actually in March, not even 2 months after inauguration, the American Psychiatric Association changed its Goldwater Rule interpretation. Basically, it used to be, and I agreed with it, that you, when you're asked about a public figure, you shouldn't diagnose from afar without a personal examination and without consent.
Right.
Well, we were not talking about diagnosis here. We were talking about danger to society and potential unfitness, which are public health concerns, not personal, private diagnosing for private patient treatment situation.
Right.
But the APA conflated the two and said that the Goldwater Rule actually meant no comment whatsoever, not just diagnosis. That was the shocking part of it.
Yeah, and didn't they go to the media and say that you were being unethical? And you're not even a member of the APA, if I remember correctly.
That actually came a year later.
Oh, okay.
So our response to the APA's dramatic reconstruction of the Goldwater Rule was to make that issue a focus of the conference. Then, the Yale School of Public Health fell away and Yale School of Nursing fell away. The Yale School of Medicine held on, but I suggested I make it a personal conference. They gave me the auditorium and all of the provisions for it, but I made it a personal conference so as not to hold them accountable. So
early days of universities being afraid of political fallout, I assume. And if I may just say, it was my sense that Big Pharma was pressuring the APA about this because they wanted.
That was after we became famous.
I see. Please.
I do have to credit the Yale School of Medicine for holding on and sponsoring the conference until I let them off the hook. And the Yale Department of Psychiatry, even after the conference made us known around the world, actually, their coverage was in 4 different continents. And then it led to our best-selling book, which was unprecedented of its kind. In fact, Macmillan, which is one of the big 5 publishers, could not keep up with the demand. It took them 5 weeks to be able to print enough copies.
Yeah, New York Times bestseller.
Yes.
Great.
And it would have been #1 if we had had enough books, many have said. And then we became within 3 months, the number one topic of national conversation. And I was in the media 15 hours a day, every single day, invited by all the top news programs. There wasn't a program that I wasn't invited to. And that was when the APA came in and said we were being unethical, we were armchair psychiatrists, politicizing psychiatry for self-aggrandizing purposes. I mean, using language that I never saw a professional association use. But it had a public relations effect.
Yeah.
Usually, you don't even say that a psychiatrist is being unethical. What happens is a complaint comes in, they do a confidential investigation.
Right.
And they do not even let the results of the investigation be known publicly, even after it's been done. But in this case, they didn't have to do any investigation. They knew, and they were breaking their own Goldwater Rule, their new version that you're not supposed to make any comment on a public figure. Well, we were public figures by that time.
Right.
So they obviously had a different agenda. Of course, we learned later on that they received unprecedented federal funding under the Trump administration, and they even enough to open a brand new building near Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., moving from their decades-long location in Arlington, Virginia. So, and of course, the pharmaceutical industry was involved in it because they staunchly supported Donald Trump. In fact, our best-selling New York Times bestseller was prevented from being reviewed for the New York Times book reviews. And seasoned reporters tried to review our book because they felt it was so historically important, and they were blocked.
I read it, and it is very important. I really want people to read it still. It's really the brilliant people, like my mentor, Robert J. Lifton, another mentor, Philip Zimbardo of Stanford fame, and people who are experts at diagnosing dangerousness. And I would like to ask you to talk about dangerousness and how does one from a distance be able to say, this is a problem and we need to, take it seriously.
Dangerousness has nothing to do with diagnosis. In fact, it's a functional assessment. So objective observations, especially seeing the person in their functional role, whatever their office may be, that kind of evaluation is far more valuable than a personal interview.
Right.
In fact, for those who have some of the most dangerous personality disorders, are better not to interview because they present with incredible charm. They are beguiling. They can hypnotize.
Yes.
And they hypnotize crowds. That's why some political psychologists have called them spellbinders.
Yep.
So,
and we know Hitler practiced in front of a mirror to develop his ability to mesmerize the German people in the Nazi regime.
That's how they rise in power and gain stature that they are unfit to hold.
Right.
And there are some studies that show that a personal interview actually takes away from assessment of dangerousness or fitness for duty. And so what you really rely on are collateral reports, objective records, documentation, and as well as objective observation of them over time in their functional role, which is the best data you can get. And we, of course, have decades of information on Donald Trump.
Yeah, if I may add, because I know you and I read the book and I've heard you being interviewed many times. Donald Trump said I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and kill somebody and my followers will still follow me. And you're like, this isn't collateral reports. This is his own words. Like, this is not someone normal would ever say. I could kill someone and my people will still blindly follow me.
And as we know, far more dangerous than going out and killing one person at a time is to talk about things in that way, in ways that instigate violence in others. In fact, dangerous rhetoric can be far more deadly than personal violence. In fact, some of the greatest mass murderers in history never killed a person themselves,
Right.
but have instituted rhetoric, um, cultures of violence, and policies of
Yeah,
violence.
Mao, Stalin, Mussolini, Hitler, just to name a few, but there's so many others, right? So
Yes.
we have a track record, and it's my understanding that intelligence agencies of every major government have profiles of world leaders, and they can then use the profile to manipulate or to advise their people how to deal with this person.
Yes, absolutely. And Dr. Gerald Post himself advised the CIA on how to deal with world leaders, and President Jimmy Carter complimented him for helping him on a number
And
of
he was in your book, and he came to the press conference and spoke. There's a video. We're going to put the link in our Substack article to see the press conference and hear these brilliant people. And forgive me, but I forgot the name of, was it a general who also spoke there?
Oh, yes. A retired brigadier general who's also a forensic psychiatrist, Dr. Stephen Xenakis.
Xenakis, exactly. He was brilliant. I loved him. And he was talking about how, you can't be on a nuclear submarine. You have to be evaluated every year to even be near, much less be in charge of the... Yeah,
bitterly ironic that every military officer must pass a mental fitness evaluation before they assume their duties. And those handling nuclear weapons have to undergo rigorous psychological testing every year. But the commander-in-chief of all of them has no such requirement. And that glaring omission is something that the public needs to be aware of, that fitness for duty exams are actually quite common, and every single job where life and death is concerned, even cleaning up toxic waste, requires a fitness for duty exam, but not the one on whom the nation's survival depends.
Right. So that's one of your initiatives that you were proposing that we, for future, put into place to have these fitness exams. Talk to us about the 25th Amendment, because I remember some Congress people wanting to see, is there anything we can do? This was in the first term. Talk to us about that.
I truly believe that, save for the APA's intervention, the New York Times was also coordinating with them in putting out a scathing editorial board article stating that psychiatrists should know better than to speak out, that we should rely on voting rather than the 25th Amendment or on what psychiatrists have to say. Of course, that was nonsense and fed by the APA. We later learned that they met with a past APA president, Dr. Jeffrey Lieberman, who I credit for the entire silencing of mental health experts, so that our nation is at a perilous place as we are today. But
I choke on the word credit, Bandy, because it's his fault. Shame on him.
Discredit, yes.
Discredit
and shame.
Yes. Sorry to interrupt you.
The worst kind of medical malpractice that our country has seen in its history.
Yes. So please talk about the 25th Amendment.
Yes. So at that time, I was consulting more and more with Congress members, former majority and minority leaders who, following our conference, and then all the more so following the publication of our book, invited me. And so I brought along my esteemed colleagues, including Dr. James Gilligan, to meet with what would be more than 50 Congress members by the end. And they were surprisingly relying on us to educate the public medically. These are their words. If we could educate the public medically, then they could intervene politically.
Right.
And what they meant was the 25th Amendment.
Mm-hmm.
And many have forgotten that Representative Jamie Raskin had a bill in Congress that was rapidly gaining ground. In fact, it jumped from a dozen sponsors to 67 sponsors within days. And they truly felt that we could have a proper intervention, even if it was unprecedented, because so many respected mental health experts were coming forward. And that included Dr. Robert J. Lifton, Dr. Judith Herman, Dr. Philip Zimbardo, and all the best-known psychiatrists and psychologists respected around the world were coming forward with a medical consensus.
Yes, and let me just add, you weren't being paid. This was like service to humanity. Everybody's putting their livelihood and their reputation on the line because the danger was so obvious for those of us who have the training and the background. I'm not a forensic psychiatrist. I am a forensic expert from the cult, mind control, brainwashing point of view. But let me just add, Jamie Raskin and I met at a meeting in Massachusetts, and we sat for 2 hours, and then he read 3 of my books and my doctoral dissertation on applying trafficking law to update the law about undue influence. And so he's the one who was leading the, cult word. But in the end, he said he just couldn't get even his caucus to align with him. And, politics are frustrating, to say the least.
Yes.
Yeah.
The minute the APA came out and put doubt in the public's mind about what we were stating, he was furious. In fact, he proposed that Congress put out a statement that they wished to hear from mental health experts. I should have taken up that offer. I at that time naively thought that it needlessly called attention to our struggles from within, that I thought that reason would prevail because there was absolutely no argument regarding the Goldwater Rule. Goldwater Rule experts themselves said that it was meant more as an etiquette, not to supersede national danger, and to supersede our ordinary role of speaking about the fitness of leaders if that became a public health problem. We actually, the foremost Goldwater Rule scholars, Drs. Jerome Kroll and Claire Pouncey, themselves put out an influential article clarifying that the Goldwater Rule was never meant to be a prohibition. It was meant to be an etiquette toward public figures, never meant to supersede our obligation for societal safety. And they even said that not just in the case of national security concerns should we speak up, but any contribution to public health and well-being should be spoken about if a public figure poses any concerns. And so the APA stance was completely in contrast to scholarship, evolving science, and practice, because now, all the psychiatric board examinations are done based on practicing diagnosis from afar. You watch a video and come up with a differential diagnosis.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And with telemedicine and telepsychiatry, it did not make any sense at all. But what does the public do but listen to the authorities that who have this expertise? So it was truly unethical and egregious on the part of the APA to spread this kind of disinformation for their own political and financial gain.
Yeah. And may I add, if you don't mind, when I was researching the cult of Trump, I interviewed James Scaminacci III, who did his PhD in political sociology at Stanford. And he talked about fourth generation psychological warfare that the U.S. intelligence agency had been waging against countries that we didn't like. where they would attack experts and attack science and the institutions of those countries to create confusion and disorientation. And so there's a general attack on experts. Why?
That's right.
Because if you want to control people, make them distrust experts, make them distrust institutions. And even though the APA didn't explicitly talk about me, when the cult of Trump came out and I was told by my publisher, everyone wanted to interview me, I got crickets. And I was like, what's going on? And the publicist, if I may add, at Simon & Schuster said, well, I have a friend who's a producer in TV. And she said, if Stephen Hassan wants to talk about the Attorney General of the United States, Bill Barr, being a member of a cult and get on TV, he's got another thing coming to him, which was very interesting because Bill Barr was on the board of directors of Opus Dei, which is a very extreme right-wing Catholic cult. But they didn't, they didn't say if Steve Hassan wants to say the president of the United States is a cult leader. They went after that. And that was interesting. But I experienced the censorship too.
Yes, I would say that authoritarian regimes are the first targets of authoritarian regimes are intellectuals and journalists, because they are determined, they are invested in keeping the public uninformed and uneducated, because knowledge is not only power, it is the solution. If we had dealt with this mental health emergency from a mental health perspective, using the principles we know in intervening with such situations, even though it's an unprecedented situation, we would have resolved this problem long ago. In fact, the world is wondering why we haven't solved this problem. It was because the APA blocked the most important experts from educating the public and from intervening properly. We know that four-star General John Kelly, when he was White House Chief of Staff in the early stages, referred to our book like an owner's manual. The Guardian, the UK's Guardian reported that he used it on a daily basis to try to curb the dangers of Donald Trump. And when he was threatening North Korea with nuclear war, he just could not, there was no way to stop him other than to use the principles in our book, which succeeded. And he states that that was the way in which he intervened with the threat of nuclear war.
Right. So I want to we've been talking about a half an hour or so. We have a half an hour to go. We're talking and recording this interview now, August 18th, as I said at the beginning. Bandy, what do we do now? Like, what do we, he's dismantling all the checks and balances, getting rid of all the people who were Kelly and others who were trying to, rein him in the first time he was in the White House. And now he's just demanded loyalty. What is your words of wisdom?
Yes, well, exactly what we had warned against has happened. Since the very beginning of our coming out publicly, we stated that, the condition was dangerous, that he would only grow worse, and eventually, if we did not contain him, he would become uncontainable. And I also stated that if we would not be able to intervene through the principles that were most relevant, that is the mental health principles, through the consultations with mental health experts, then nothing else would work. Not impeachment, not prosecution, not elections. And that's exactly what happened. So we have been correct all the way from the very beginning. In terms of the level of dangerousness and the timing of the dangerousness. We've been correct at times at predicting his attacks sometimes within days, sometimes within months. And I feel bad to say that I also predicted this election.
Yeah.
That was the point of my writing the book, The Psychology of Trump Contagion, which I urgently published in 2024, the same way that I published Profile of a Nation, Trump's Mind, America's Soul, to try to educate the public about the dangers of his reelection, because it would not be based on rational endorsement or informed choice, but it would be based on something that you've been speaking of, Steve, undue influence at massive scale.
Right.
This undue influence would be not simply because of his machinations, his recruitment of patrons and pawns, which psychopathic individuals do, but it would also be a result of his spread of symptoms, that severe mental symptoms are rapidly spreading like a contagious disease, and we have kind of the environment conducive to it, such as mass media and social media and rapid spread of especially violent rhetoric, and that his election would almost be assured if we did not have some kind of mental health informed intervention.
Right.
But of course, the opposite happened. No one consulted with us. In fact, we've been totally blacked out of the media. In the beginning, I was, after the APA came out in early 2018, calling us armchair psychiatrists and unethical, I was invited about more than 70 times to network television programs, cable TV, news programs that would cancel me or cancel the episode.
Yeah, you'd literally be invited. You go to the studio and they cancel you.
Yes, I would be in the studio and all of a sudden they would say they changed their program. 100%, not one got through, except one final one with CNN, and the producer of that show got fired soon after.
Yeah.
So we can see the degree to which mental health expertise has been censored from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And that is no accident.
Right.
They knew that our voice was the most relevant and potentially the most effective.
Right, exactly. And information control is one of the pillars of the BITE model of authoritarian control. And I feel like I'd be remiss to say Trump is a pathological liar. He's had over 40,000 documented lies. And what's interesting now, Bandy, is that some people who are true believers are starting to question it. And once you shift that frame from blind faith to, can we trust him that he's a pedophile and a serial abuser of women? Once that crack happens, I know for when I got out of the Moonies, it's just like a house of cards start to fall down.
Absolutely, because it's all based on falsehood, a mirage, a mask that they wear. And just to continue on how important public education is and how vigorously they blocked it. Someone even said there must be a memo that went around all the news agencies because not one could get through. That includes 12 different news articles on the New York Times. Once I was on the New York Times front cover, and then there were 12 different times that even senior reporters could not get a single quote of mine into their articles. In fact, there was one article that Peter Baker actually formulated around my quotes, and all his quotes were deleted before the article came out without his even being informed that his article would be redacted in this way.
Yeah,
NPR did the same thing. They filmed 2 different episodes and they did not air them without informing the producer and the host, as well as other major publications one that even had me scheduled for their magazine front cover.
Yeah. If I may add from a personal note, just this week, New York Times did a major article on the tech bros, the billionaires, Musk and Zuckerberg and Thiel, and their world religion, trying to push transhumanism and all of that. And they focused the article around Greg Epstein, who's the Harvard MIT humanist chaplain who wrote the book Tech Agnostic. And I get a message from Greg on LinkedIn. I kept telling the reporter, Steve, that he needs to interview you and quote you. And in the article itself, it says, and Greg Epstein says it's a cult. And that was it. Like, no explanation. What is a cult or any of it? But in the book, it has my influence continuum, the bite model, and everything else. But I'm just confirming, even though I'm not, a forensic psychiatrist, I'm being blocked as well, because this is a public health emergency, and they don't want the public to understand how the mind works and how psychopathology works.
Well, the Goldwater Rule wasn't supposed to apply to me because it only applies to APA members, since no licensing board can adopt it. It violates the First Amendment.
Right.
But I wasn't a member I had quit the APA 10 years before I started speaking, and yet they assumed that they could speak for all psychiatrists and all mental health professionals. I mean, their membership is something like 6% of mental health professionals, and yet they purported to speak for the entire profession, which is another egregious way in which they misled the public. There is no equivocation about this.
Right. So you're an expert in social psychiatry, how the mind works, how people influence each other. I really would like to ask you to opine in this moment in time, as many people who are coming out of the Trump contagion effect. What should family members and friends who've had people get radicalized into MAGA, how do they, please advise us on, I know my advice, but I want to hear yours as well.
I think you're really the expert in this area. And as you know, I've practiced mostly prevention and intervention with violent offenders.
Mm-hmm.
So I have seen over and over again how gang leaders, prison kingpins, and those who lead these groups with severe psychiatric symptoms, just like Donald Trump, who are violence prone and collect followers. Once they are removed from their position of influence, removed from contact, then all the followers usually return to their baseline state of functioning, which is usually healthier than the leader.
Yes, for sure.
And it's often dramatic.
Yes.
It's called a phenomenon of shared psychosis in psychiatry, or induced delusions. They change it for DSM-5, but many don't trust the DSM-5 as much as DSM-4, which was less affected by the pharmaceutical industry.
And that's a document of the American Psychiatric Association, and they have committees, and it's political too, where they're voting.
It's become highly political, and the DSM-5 is often said to be worse than the version it was supposed to have improved upon.
Yeah.
So I go by DSM-4. So it's called shared psychosis.
Mm-hmm.
It's more a phenomenon than a personal diagnosis, because it happens when there is a dominant figure with severe mental symptoms who either recruits or isolates followers from other gangs or other environments where they could gain broader information.
Yes.
And then these followers come to take on the exact same psychiatric symptoms as the leader.
Yep.
In fact, their syndrome looks identical. If the leader has schizophrenia and has bizarre delusions that there are aliens from outer space beaming thoughts into their heads, they will still believe it, even previously normal individuals. This dynamic is incredibly important to understand, because there is a point where the followers, no matter how healthy and no matter how rational they were prior to this level of exposure and pressure on the part of the dominant individual, they will take on all manner of bizarre delusions.
Yeah.
So when we hospitalize the leader of the group, when we separate them, arrest them, or separate them in prison, then it's important to know that the followers return to their normal state of being, for the most part. Some of them are harder to convert, but
if I can add, I just finished a fascinating book by a UPenn neuroscientist named Emily Falk on a book called What We Value. And she's doing a lot of functional MRI research. And she talks about documenting the fact that our brains will entrain to the people, or even online, our brains will sync because we're growth organisms. We adapt to our environments. And so
absolutely,
it's so important.
We are social animals. We are, we mirror each other. There are mirror neurons that give us the exact same experience as the person we're observing. We imitate each other. We reflect each other. We're interconnected.
Yes.
Far more than what the individually oriented psychiatrists would say, or the pharmaceutical industry connected psychiatrists would say. We, all our psychology is biopsychosocial.
And I use that term too, biopsychosocial. People need to understand we're not individuals, we're not islands, we're not rational, we're really emotional, social beings. And you have to look at the system, not just what's happening within the person as well. And you're doing a Substack. I've started a Substack. We're trying to gain an audience of other mental health professionals who can go on, but also the general public. Because what I see, and I think you agree, because I've been listening to some of your interviews, we need to do a bottom-up movement because we can't trust the authorities because it's been co-opted through money and political machinations. We need to start it at the bottom and educate everyone up and get rid of this takeover and destruction.
We need to improve our collective mental health.
Yeah.
And the way to do so is to start by education. That is a main public health intervention. And thank you for bringing up my Substack. I know you'll list the links, but let me just say bandyxlee.substack.com. I also have a website, bandylee.com. And
the World Mental Health Coalition.
And the World, MHC.org, where Steve's concept, freedom of mind, has been adopted in our Declaration of Freedom of Mind as essential to safeguarding our collective mental health during times of authoritarianism and essentially takeover through mind control and spread of contagious disease.
Yeah, so I've been banging the drum to not block and cut off your family and friends who have joined MAGA, and be warm and ask questions. Don't try to argue logically or rationally, and be a good active listener, mirror back to them, make sure they feel heard, and ask questions that provoke reality testing and such.
Absolutely.
Because people will exit on their
mental
own.
Health principles that work with a mental health issue. A collective mental health issue is also a mental health issue that we need to approach using our well-established, studied over a century and a half principles that we should not shun from public awareness.
Right.
Or otherwise, it would be like going back to the plague. Before we had scientific knowledge and public health interventions, we had the plague, which wiped out half of Europe's population.
Right.
at one time. We know that we do not have to live through that, even though we somewhat did under the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah.
That should serve as a lesson that if we do not respond with the scientific intellectual knowledge that we have, then we will fall right back to becoming, under the COVID-19 pandemic, we led the world in number of deaths, and we were the epicenter of COVID deaths, now marking over 1.2 million deaths.
Yeah. And the disinformation continues with RFK Jr. attacking
and
vaccinations.
This time it will be 10 to 20 million deaths if we had another pandemic.
And they don't
that would be
care.
An underestimate, without even counting all the world wars, the risk of world war,
right.
All the international wars that have been stoked and further instigated by Donald Trump. He said he was ending endless wars, but of course we predicted he would begin unending wars with his presidencies. And people will be able to read in The Psychology of Trump Contagion how I attribute to him even the Russian war against Ukraine and the Israeli response to Hamas in Palestine, the genocide that is occurring in Palestine, could be traced back to Donald Trump's psychology that he has spread throughout the world and is continuing to influence.
And I went out on a limb in 2019 when the cult of Trump came out, and I said Russia was the puppet master of Donald Trump, and then Bill Barr lied about the results of the Mueller investigation and said there was no Russian involvement. And there's overwhelming evidence, and just recently this last meeting was just one more validation that Putin grew up in an authoritarian political cult called the Soviet Union, became a KGB agent, and the U.S. helped to take the Soviet Union down. And he's been on a war in recruiting Christian nationalists and dominionists and Opus Dei and all these other factions, libertarians and the tech, billionaires, to take down the United States. And so I really see Trump as an agent of Putin and not just
Well, we don't have
adjacent.
to have evidence of compromise or anything else as mental health experts to know that Donald Trump is Vladimir Putin's pawn psychologically. That was when the Mueller's report was the basis on which the top mental health experts of the country, came together and did a mental fitness evaluation of Donald Trump. We used all the standardized criteria and using the highest quality information we could have, that is collateral reports under sworn testimony, and came up with the conclusion that he was mentally unfit in all categories, all criteria for mental unfitness were met, and that he was dangerous to the country and absolutely influenceable by nefarious
just give him money or stoke his ego and make him believe that people will love him.
However you wish.
Yeah, it's so formulaic. So I think we need to go virtual and get a lot of the top people who know this topic so well and care about freedom and democracy. We should organize a virtual conference again. Please lead us. I will be there. If you want me to speak, I love to talk and share my years of expertise. I think we need to reach out to Europe and every other country that's looking at what's happening in the U.S. going, how could Americans be so stupid to follow this man? And I want to say it's not stupidity, it's mind control.
Yes.
I'm a very bright person, but I got into the Moonies through deception and hypnosis and brainwashing and sleep deprivation and all the things that I've detailed.
Has nothing to do with intelligence.
So and maybe we need to ask, England.
I will add that European groups have invited me to come together with their leaders, and there will be discussions. we should do something among Americans and join them.
We need to, for me, it's not left and right anymore. It's authoritarianism and versus human rights, rule of law, and women's rights and gay rights and children's rights and indigenous rights and trans rights and just the rights of people to live and have health care and food.
My definition of an authoritarian is a person who cannot let others live.
I have to think on that one. Yeah, and I think we need a vision of a positive future that isn't just fueling this apocalyptic crap that I've been hearing for so many decades of, it doesn't matter what we're doing with the fossil fuels because Jesus is coming back and God's going to remake the world. So we don't need to worry about pollution and plastic that we're ingesting and all these chemicals that corporations know are harmful to human health, like processed sugar is one of the worst. So we need a positive vision and then tell people, like, don't give up hope and don't silence yourself in advance. That's another thing Tim Snyder, on tyranny, etc. He's like, we can't self-censor. We need to keep our voices loud and constant and encourage others to not cave.
Yes, because obedience in advance. We see what happened to all the universities when they caved in. They are targeted more and more.
Yes.
Same with the media, and we cannot capitulate in advance. That is what places us in greatest danger. That's why mental health experts like yourself and like I came out and risked our careers, risked our safety in order to warn the public. And we certainly didn't profit from it. We donated all revenues from our best-selling book to show that this was a public service, and we are continuing to try to do so. And I call myself a barometer of our societal mental health. When society is ready to consult with us, when they reach out to me, will be the time when society is ready to heal.
Well, I'm gonna push you a little bit, or push my listeners, because you never know who's listening to this now or watching us. But if there are, because there's an estimated 260 billionaires to Donald Trump's 60 billionaires. If there's some billionaires going, what do we do? I think we have like some concrete suggestions based on real science.
We have the principles.
So give a spiel, please. Give a pitch. I want to hear.
We cannot discount 150 years of scientific research and hundreds of years of clinical experience among ourselves, that even given the unprecedented situation, we have to apply mental health principles to a mental health problem.
Right.
So I'm actually developing a curriculum on how to create a life-affirming world order that does not give rise to unfit leaders, that in fact stops them, interrupts their spread, as well as contains them. And so I've been calling it One World or None, which I'm developing as a curriculum. It's on my Substack. But come September, we'll have a more fully developed curriculum, which will be publicized through the Violence Prevention Institute I'm a part of, which we will call Preventing Violence Now, One World or None.
Yeah, so let me just give you devil's advocate feedback, because I heard you mention this when I appeared on your Substack a few days ago. A lot of the cult members are programmed to worry about one world government. And I worry that they may hear your one world or none, and like say, oh, see, she's trying to do the authoritarian thing, which is the opposite of what you're
Yes, there
proposing.
will be more multilateral governments, multilateralism, and less focus on national governments, and actually more equality and more democracy across the world, rather than a top-down rule. And as you know, one government, even the United Nations, have been vilified so that the people will have no recourse against their own national governments if they become authoritarian, which is what the United Nations was intended to prevent.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we're going to be wrapping up soon, but I really want to ask you to talk for a few minutes about what you see with social media and people being on their phones 8 hours a day, exposure to children, because, I've interviewed a number of experts who are talking about the dangers of that. Please, because we're living in a digital world now.
Yes.
Largely.
What I'm most afraid of from social media and the media environment in general is that less and less people are getting together in person.
Right.
In-person interactions, as I said, we're social beings. We need interpersonal interactions in full presence of ourselves in order to develop neurologically. We continue to develop until we're 35 years old, and continue to adjust our neural connections throughout our lifetimes.
Right.
So if we're isolated and simply gratifying certain needs through media and these less robust compensations, then we will be depriving ourselves of that development. And the influence, the most major influence, I think, of that is that we will become less autonomous, freely thinking beings who have the psychological, moral, and spiritual foundation to be able to think for ourselves, because our development is not as fully robust as it could be.
Right.
So I think the consequences are enormous.
Right. And we don't want to give up our ability to think for ourselves and give it to AI and ChatGPT to tell us what to do.
Yes, and that's another problem.
Right.
Stephen Hawking said that one of the greatest perils humanity faces was going to be artificial intelligence. And he already saw decades ahead of time how we would become lured and substitute our own thinking for what AI could provide, which is, of course, does not ever and cannot ever, in my opinion, reach the levels of creativity, generativity, and life-affirming intangibles that we as human beings offer to one.
Yeah, like love. Pornography is not love, and it's not sex. It's something else. And people are spoiling themselves from enjoying the rich experience of being with human beings with our frailties and everything else.
Yes.
And I'll just add Jeff Hinton, who got a Nobel Prize for AI, has been saying this is really dangerous. And we need, the last interview I heard from him, he was saying we need to make AI have a maternal instinct to take care of people as children. I love that.
Yes. That's what it's going to boil down to, because the more these disordered, dangerous personalities come into power, and we've created a societal structure that they can easily attain power, more and more so, they are going to target nurturing parental mother-child bonds.
Right.
And we saw that happen at the U.S.-Mexico border when one of the first policies by Donald Trump. And we're now seeing it increasingly with immigration agents tearing apart families, tearing apart just hardworking people who are
Right.
supporting a family, who are more likely to have the kinds of parent-child bonds that
Yep.
Donald Trump was in.
Yes, thank you so much for all your good work. I'll just hold up the most recent volume, The Much More Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, edited by Bandy Lee, MD. You have a Master's of Divinity, too, so you are a spiritual person in addition to being a scientist and a doctor. Any last words as we wrap up?
Well, since you brought up spirituality, I think we are living in a time of such great peril that we need to think of things also at a spiritual level. We need to take care of our own mental health. We need to gain or regain spiritual grounding, that is, thinking of our place in the cosmos,
Right.
in the whole spectrum of human history,
Yeah.
where we're now arriving at a moment where we could become the first species in existence to bring about its own extinction.
Yeah.
And these are the perilous times that we're living. We need to devote some time to stepping out of our everyday lives and our own protection, our own individual interests,
Yes.
and to come together to meet this incredible challenge that is threatening the
Yeah.
survival of the human species.
Yeah, I'm forgive me for adding another thing, but for me, the great commandment, I'm Jewish, is love God with all your heart, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as you love yourself. It's a love commandment, not a violence commandment or a terrorism commandment. And loving God with all your heart means with your flaws and your issues, not, in some type of puristic way, but just like, don't put yourself as the center of the universe like psychopaths. Like, for them, they are the center and everyone's an object for their, well, it's like the opposite is what we need. We need to realize we depend on each other. We need to trust each other. And that's what gives me hope, is that there are a lot of brilliant people with so many talents and abilities. We just need to work together.
Yes.
And come up with a solution.
That's my favorite Bible verse as a Christian. But all religions have love as the foundation.
Yeah.
Love and unity. And that's where we need to head toward.
Yes. Bandy X Lee, thank you so much, and we'll be in touch. Take care.
Thank you very much. See you.